Okay. Getting ready to have a discussion about grant writing and nonprofits and all those things I get questions about all the time. Looking forward to having some live chat and conversation tonight on the on YouTube Live for the next hour at least, or I'm hoping. So we'll see. Talking about grants, grant writing, nonprofit consulting. I should say nonprofits and issues surrounding nonprofits and what they have to deal with. Anybody joining, I hope you will just sign on and say something or say a shout out on where you are and where you are tonight and where you're watching from. Not sure if this is showing that I'm the person that's on the line or not. So if someone is joining me, I hope you will just say something on the chat. This is my first time going live on YouTube. So I wanted to try out this medium tonight, and I'm really excited about that. So I'm Latrina Patrick with Greater Vision Consulting. My YouTube channel is focused on my nonprofit, I'm sorry, my consulting firm that focuses on nonprofits and helping people to learn how to write grants. I work with nonprofit organizations to help them build their capacity so that they can um, become better, they can pursue funding, they can develop more programs. And so I do that. And I also work with individuals who are interested in learning how to write grants. And I do a lot of workshops and webinars and trainings around that. So I mostly train individuals around just the classes, online classes, mostly do some things in person. And so that is the focus of what I do. And I've been in this grant writing industry for almost 2 decades now. So I started out working for a very small nonprofit connected to a large church in the city where I lived at that time. Um, I've had a lot of success in writing grants, and I had a lot of success in teaching people how to write grants. So I just wanted to take on some live questions since I have a lot of people watching my videos. 90 days to writing a grant. I did that specifically for YouTube, and it just kind of starts with day one, teaching you the basics and the foundation. And it's really designed for beginners, and it goes up to the 90th day. So I've had a lot of people who have watched those videos and I did that over 5 years ago, and I still get emails to this day at least once or twice a week from someone who is watching those videos and having questions or commenting about the benefit that they have seen from watching those videos. So again, I just wanted to come on live tonight and just see if I could just have some contact with people who are actually interested in that. And I really wanted to answer some of the most commonly asked questions around grant writing. And, so I have a lot of questions that I get from people. And so I just wanted to take some of those common ones. A lot of my experience, aside from working specifically as a grant writer, but I also have a really strong background in reviewing grants. And so I use that knowledge that I've gained from reviewing grants to actually help people learn to write grants. And so the perspective from a grant reviewer is very insightful and helpful to anyone that's trying to learn. It taught me a lot when I started reviewing grants for the feds. And so every time I learn something, I always want to teach other people. And so that's really where my take comes from with that. So before I get started, I really want to encourage people who watch the video to make sure you visit my website at www.greatervisionconsulting.com to subscribe to my updates so that you can get more information about when I have events coming up. I also send out weekly, well, not weekly all the time, but several times a month. I send out updates about grant writing opportunities, grant writing training, and just keeping people in the loop. So make sure you do that. And that way you'll find out more about what's coming up. And so I want to just take on a couple of questions that I commonly get. And one of the questions that I get, and one of the most commonly things people ask is, how do I get started writing grants? So if you are someone who is new to grant writing and you're interested in doing this, or you've been kind of dabbling in it for a little bit and you just don't really know how to go about it, the first thing I'll tell you is to really try to gain as much knowledge as you possibly can. When I started, what was that? 2001, when I decided that I was going to enter grant writing, and it was something I just decided kind of randomly out of a desire to help faith-based organizations. And I decided that I wanted to learn how to write grants. And so what I started doing was taking classes, just saturating myself with as much information as I could. At the time in the city I was in Columbus, Georgia at that time, and they just opened up a new nonprofit center there. And so that local nonprofit center had a lot of resources, and they would bring people in to train and do workshops for relatively inexpensive amounts. So I would do that. I mean, we didn't have Google like we do today to really help so much, and YouTube. So I started trying to really learn as much as I can. And what I found was that the more that I started putting myself in circles where I could actually learn about it, I found out about other opportunities. And so today I would encourage you to get on YouTube. I mean, I know my videos are really great for beginners, and it's for it teaches you up to 90 days. But you're going to find, if you just type in grant writing, you're going to find tons of people, but you really need to find someone that you kind of gel with and relate with, because some trainers may come on and you may not like their teaching style, or they may not go as in depth with the knowledge, or you may be hearing the same things over and over. So as a start, just start there. And then I encourage you to start really, as you start getting some information and a little knowledge, I would encourage you to, at that point, start paying for some courses, because you're going to really have to invest in yourself. And find someone that you like their teaching style, or you feel like you can learn from them, and then start trying to test them out and see what they're offering. But just, you're going to have to start paying some money at some point if this is something that you really consider. I do a lot of trainings myself. I have online trainings that I put on my website, but I'm going to be making some changes coming up in January. And so a lot of the things that I'm offering are going to be really expanded so that I can have a greater depth of information for people to be able to tap into. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And I have a really great classes coming up in January. So if you get subscribed to my emails at greatervisionconsulting.com, then you'll be among the first to hear about that when the registration opens up. So if you want to get started in grants, that is one of the things that I encourage you to do, is to really start trying to learn as much as you can. And then I encourage you to really connect with people in the industry. So whether it's through meetup groups or professional associations, if you're in a large enough city or a metro area that actually happens to have a nonprofit center. I'm in Florida. We do have one here in Jacksonville. I know Atlanta has a really great nonprofit center, and other larger metro areas tend to have them too. So they are a great resource. They typically offer a lot of trainings, and if they don't offer trainings directly, they are definitely connected with consultants or other organizations that do. So those are some ways to kind of get started. And once you start really learning about it, then you want to start testing the waters and start maybe partnering with organizations to try to help them, or to try to be a part of the process. I mean, if someone is seriously pursuing grants, you've never had any experience, then they may not take a risk on you as someone that could totally go all the way in. But if it is someone that is starting out, just really don't have anybody to do that for them, then they really have nothing to lose by letting someone who is new help them with that. So make sure that you put yourself in an environment where you can get some hands-on learning, because that's always helpful. And then another question that I always get is, what's the difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit? And that's a really good question, because a nonprofit organization is an organization that, just the basic understanding of one is that it's an organization that is a charitable organization. They may or may not have a tax exempt designation from the IRS, but they are a charitable organization. And then, but they, what they do, what they can make a profit, but the profit that they make, it needs to go back into services. A for-profit organization is basically an organization that can do whatever they want with their profits. So a nonprofit is a charitable organization that can make a profit, but the profit has to go back into services. And a for-profit organization can do whatever they want. And so, because a nonprofit is charitable, they are eligible for grants. Other things about a nonprofit is that a nonprofit is exempt from income taxes from the federal government, and in some cases, they're exempt from sales taxes. They can apply for grants, and again, it's what they do with their profits. Now, can a nonprofit organization make money? That's another question. Yes, they can make money. Many nonprofit organizations do make money, but it goes back to what they do with the profits that they make. You can be a nonprofit and very successful. A lot of people think that just because you are a nonprofit that you can't make any money, you can't be successful and generate, income and revenue. That's definitely not the case. There are tons of nonprofit organizations, large and small, that make a great deal of money, but they do a lot of good work. Just off the top of my head, Red Cross, American Red Cross, they literally make millions and millions of dollars, but they put that back into the work that they do. Habitat for Humanity, just some of these, the American Cancer Society, these are all nonprofit organizations. And then, can you get a grant without a 501c3 designation? That's another question I get. And a 501c3 designation is basically a tax exempt designation that comes from the IRS. 501c3 is the most common of those, but there are other designations that are considered tax exempt as well. But 501c3 is the most common designation. There are about 26 designations under the tax code 501, US code 50, IRS code 501. You can get a grant without a nonprofit 501c3 designation, but it's very limited in the ones that you get. And the reason that is because that designation tells a funder that if I give to this organization, then I can get a tax break on my donation. And they don't want to, otherwise, they're just literally giving the money away. And grants are free money, but not really. So if you are giving them away, if you're giving money to an organization that doesn't have a tax exempt status, and there's not as much incentive for the funder to give to your organization. But there are organizations or smaller private foundations that don't necessarily care. You'll be able to find that out when they release their applications, soliciting applications. They have all the instructions, and they will tell you right off the bat who is eligible and who's not. And then they will say that you must have a 501c3. 98% of the time when you're applying for grants as a nonprofit, they require you to have a 501c3 or just a tax exempt status. So depending on what type of designation you have. Another question, and the most common question that I get, is, can I get a grant to start my blank business? And the blank is, fill in that blank, because you really can start. I get questions about starting a daycare center, and just because they're working for kids, people think that automatically makes them eligible for grants. I get questions about starting a beauty salon or a barber shop, or you name it. And the bottom line is, if your organization is set up to be a for-profit organization, you're not going to be someone that's eligible for grants. As I mentioned in the beginning, the main thing about a nonprofit organization is that they're set up for charitable purposes. That's the thing that makes them, that defines them as a nonprofit organization. And for-profit businesses are not set up for charitable purposes. You may do charitable things from time to time, but your overall goal with your business is to make money and to make a profit, not to necessarily be a charity. And so you're not going to be getting grants. And you hear things about small, people say small business grants. Well, there's not really small business grants either. The Small Business Administration will provide loans or low interest loans or loans that are, incentive for small business development, but they're not grants. Rarely are you going to find grants to start a for-profit organization. Now, there are some federal government agencies that will provide grants to traditional businesses, and they'll spell that out in the funding announcement. But those are usually different, very specific purposes, research related purposes, um, just different types of grants. But most grants are for programmatic purposes, meaning that you have programs where you're serving underserved communities. You may have an after school program, or helping women of domestic violence, or people who are, homeless. It's just so many different types of things. And those are not traditional for profit. I'm sorry, those are not, yeah, that's not traditional for profit businesses. And so, um, you're not going to really get grants to start your business. And while we're saying that, I also want to mention that um, for profit organizations, when you're starting a nonprofit and a for profit, the other difference between a nonprofit and a for profit is that they're both still businesses. And so a lot of times people think that just because you're a nonprofit, you don't have to have any business savvy or business sense. And that's just not the case. You still need business savvy. You still need to be able to have other streams of revenue to keep your nonprofit flowing and above board and operating in the black. So I just want to mention that while we're talking about starting a business, because a nonprofit business is still a business. And so you really need to make sure you have those skill sets. Another question is, where do I find grants? Well, I mean, it depends on your organization's level. If you are a larger nonprofit, then you may want to look into the federal grants like grants.gov. But there are other organizations or databases that you can tap into as well. So the nonprofit Foundation Center Online, you have Grant Station, there's a database there. There are a lot of different databases. So there are places to find grants, but you just have to, it just depends on what you do and how large your organization is for what you would be eligible for. Another common question is, and I think this is the last question that I have down, is can we pay the grant writer from the grant? This is one of the most biggest misconceptions out there about grants, and so it's especially smaller nonprofit organizations who are looking for a grant writer. Most of them, when I get approached by really small organizations just starting out looking to me to help them write a grant, one of the first things I ask them is about their budget, because I know if you're brand new, you're a startup, unless you are forward thinking and you know that this is going to be a part of something that you need, they typically don't have the fiscal capacity to hire a grant writer. And really, when you're at that point, you really don't need to be looking at grants yet anyway. You should be trying to get your foundation in place and get your organization structured and kind of get some programming going before you start looking for grants. And a lot of people do it the opposite way. But in going back to the original question about can you pay for a grant writer with the grant, a lot of people think that. So sometimes I've asked people, well, how are you going to pay for a grant writer? And sometimes they'll say, well, can't you pay for the grant writer when you get the grant? Well, actually, no. Excuse me, because there are a couple of things about that. From an industry standpoint, that's not ethical, because that basically what you're doing is you're trying to pay for something for a service that has already been incurred. So you've paid or used that grant writer or solicited or secured those services before the grant was ever awarded. So the grant funding is very specific, and it's specific for that particular project or that particular program. So no, you can't do that. And the other thing is, what if you don't get the grant? when you're hiring a grant writer, you're hiring them for their expertise, and you're also paying for their time. Writing grants is very, very, very time consuming, especially if you're going after federal awards. So you need to be prepared for that and understanding that you can't pay for that service after you've gotten a grant award because you may not get the grant award, and that's not an ethical practice. So be prepared to look and do your homework and your research, get references and things like that. But the cost of writing a grant can range, and typically the hourly rate for a grant writer can start at $50 an hour and go up. And depending on the type of project that you will be securing them for, especially again if it's a federal grant can run you anywhere from 2,500 up to $10,000. I know some people who are highly experienced that can charge up to $10,000 for writing a major federal grant, but there are a lot of things that go into that. So those are just some of the most commonly asked questions. If you are someone who has joined and you want to tell me who you are and whether you have any questions about grant writing or nonprofits and helping them build their capacity, I would love to answer any questions that you might have. If you want to just introduce yourself and type in a message to me. I can't see anything right now, nothing except for what I wrote. But I would love to hear from you and answer any question that you might have. Just would love to interact with you before I sign off. I've been covering some of the most commonly asked questions that I get as a grant consultant, and especially around grant writing and some specific around nonprofits. So those are the types of things I've been covering. And just giving a little bit about my background. But if you have any questions about my background and my experience, I encourage you to go to greatervisionconsulting.com. Hey, Angela. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please let me know. But yeah, so that's kind of where I am, and I have some trainings that are coming up soon in the new year. So make sure that you subscribe to the email to get notices about that. A lot of exciting new changes coming up. So so that will be something that could be very much of benefit to you. And Pastor Angela, thank you for your support. If you had any questions, I know that you are a very experienced fundraiser. So I just appreciate you joining for the support. But that's all that I was going to cover in the sense of just having, just a live Q&A. And I know this is my first time going live and I just wanted to try it out. So if there aren't any questions, you know where to find me, greatervisionconsulting.com. You can also send an email to greatervisionconsulting@gmail.com. So if that is it, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. And I hope to see you again next time I go live on YouTube. Good night.